Hello, hello, hello. This is Gretch from the I Am CEO podcast, and I have a very special guest on the show today. I have Mike Newman of Returnity Innovations. Mike, it's awesome to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me.
No problem. Super excited to have you on. And what I want to do is just read a little bit more about Mike so you can hear about all the awesome things that he's doing. And Mike Newman is the CEO of Returnity Innovations, the pioneer in the elimination of single-use shipping packaging. Mike has worked at the intersection of supply chain and sustainability for over 20 years. After directing the Sierras Club's political operations in 20 states, he received his MBA from the Ross School of Business at the University of Michigan. As Sales and Marketing Executive Vice President for ReCellular, he built e-waste programs for Verizon, AT&T, Walmart, Best Buy, and more, saving millions of used cell phones from landfills. Through his leadership at Returnity, reusable packaging will replace the use of over 1 million cardboard boxes and poly mailer bags in 2019. Mike has been featured on The Today Show, The New York Times, NPR, and many more, including the I Am CEO podcast. Mike, are you ready to speak to the I Am CEO community?
I'm excited. Yeah, thanks.
Awesome. Let's do it. So the first question I had was to hear a little bit more about what I call your CEO story and what led you to start your business.
So I was actually brought in 2 years ago by the investor group to Returnity. It had been incubated out of a reusable shopping bag business. And one of the companies that was buying those reusable shopping bags was a very early days ThredUp, which has since grown to be this huge market creator and used clothing remarketing. So at the time, James Reinhart was buying used shopping bags for ThredUp, and he tasked the founder of that shopping bag company, Mitch, with the idea of, boy, could you make me a reusable shipping bag? Mm-hmm. And that sort of spun Mitch down this rabbit hole of the initial ideas on how to figure out how to make functional reusable packaging that could replace poly mailer bags and cardboard boxes. And after working on the tech for a little while, the investor group brought me in to leverage my experience in supply chain and sustainability and figure out how we can take this technology and actually create markets for it. And so that's been this 2-year roller coaster of learning and applying and growing. And it's a really exciting time, I think, for this technology and where markets are going to be able to have that knowledge and that toolkit.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially in something that's so, very much needed for, our environment and our economy and our world. It's great to hear that you guys are on the forefront working on that and definitely, making the world an overall better place.
Yes, I think, whether it's the, needed and growing attention to climate change, or just the explosion of e-commerce and the problems of last mile delivery. I mean, we're kind of at the intersection of a lot of trend lines. Which is exciting, and we're making new markets, which is always hard, but also there's never a dull day. So it's been really cool to see how it's developed.
Yeah, it's funny that you said that. Making new markets sounds very, very exciting. Definitely not dull, but definitely, I'm sure it's definitely a lot of stuff that you're juggling, and a lot of working through things and pioneering that a lot of people have to do whenever they're doing something innovative. So I appreciate you guys for that. I know you touched on it a little bit, but I wanted to hear a little bit more on what you guys are doing. Could you take us through like how you're serving your clients? And I know you probably have different people that also benefit from that.
Yeah, I mean, at its most basic, what we've developed are bags and boxes to replace cardboard and poly mailers. Mm-hmm. And that is fairly simplistic on its face. The challenge, of course, is then what does that actually mean in the real world, and how do you get companies and consumers to adopt that evolution? And so a lot of the first things we had to do as a company was figure out just how to make a functional reusable box or bag. But then, what I found is over the last few years is what we've had to evolve beyond into is, in essence, a services company, because packaging traditionally, and really, cardboard's been around for over 100 years. Everyone knows how it works and what to do with it when they're done with it. To get companies and consumers to think differently about how they can package and convey goods requires touching all parts of the supply chain and business functions, from accounting, because now instead of an expense, which is just a cardboard box that gets recycled or thrown away, you have an asset, which is a reusable package, mm-hmm. to marketing, to consumer, education, to the shippers like DHL and UPS who are having to convey it. It touches everything in the supply chain. So what we started out was, I called a dumb packaging company. We just made dumb boxes and dumb bags. And what we've kind of evolved into is a systems company that develops the packaging, but then also guides your enterprise through the process of integrating this new way of shipping and delivering products.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And, I always wonder, whenever you are, innovating and doing something and pioneering, like how much, education and awareness probably has to, play a big part of that. So I could definitely see how you're talking about, operations, technology, and probably awareness is probably a tremendous part to, getting people to understand the benefits of it and understand also what it is.
Yes. And I think that really has been, for me, one of the most critical things is finding ways to develop products and have them work in the marketplace as closely to cardboard and poly as possible. Because the less that you have to train both your internal stakeholders and consumers on what this thing is and how to use it, the better off you're going to be. So we've really done a lot to make it a seamless integration as much as possible for that reason. Because if you really have to change behavior, any behavior change is going to create friction and challenges. And so the less education, the less training, the less new behaviors you have to introduce, the better off you're going to be.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. It's funny because I've had like sales jobs in the past, and one of the things that I remember, like one of my managers saying, is that you think your competition is all these things out there. Sometimes your biggest competition is the status quo, because a lot of people just don't want to change to anything else. So it kind of makes sense that you would align that with what people are already doing. So it's an easier transition, and then they're already doing the same things, and then they can have all these benefits as well.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, one example of that is all the carriers have this service fee that they apply to non-traditional packaging. And the way, like the way FedEx described it to us is we have people who will put a shipping label on a tire and then just drop it off at a store. Well, obviously that is problematic. So they had to have this special classification. So for us to not have that be a problem, we really had to think, okay, well, how do UPS and FedEx and the Postal Service handle cardboard? Like, how does it move through their system? Our boxes need to be able to work in that environment for them, so that they're not having to create new systems that handle these products specially, because that always adds cost. So all the minutia is really, the devil's in the details. Like that's where these things can thrive or die. And that's, where we've really had to try and be smart.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And let me ask you this: would you consider that to be like your secret sauce, for you or your organization? Do you think that's what set you guys apart?
Well, I think that, partially I think it is that, cardboard and poly has been successful because it's cheap, it's light, it's easy to use, it's effective. It protects the goods mostly during shipping. And so I think we were the first ones to understand that if you're going to change that system, you have to innovate packaging that competes on all of those criteria. There's things out there like rigid cases that people have probably seen for shipping things to trade shows and stuff like that are just big and heavy and very expensive. And they're effective at protecting goods, but they miss all those other criteria that have made cardboard and poly successful. And so I think one of our sort of differentiators has been understanding that to actually scale out a replacement to what has been, a wildly effective packaging solution over time, you have to address all of those factors that have made it successful at once. And you're going to be better on some and not as good on others, but you have to at least compete in all of those areas. And I think that's what we've been able to do from an innovation standpoint. And then the second, I think, is coming back to what we were talking about a little bit earlier, which is that it's not just about manufacturing a box and dropping it off at your customer's doorstep and saying, thank you very much. You have to hold their hand throughout this evolution, because it touches on every part of the business and it requires them thinking differently. And the more they have to figure that out on their own, the harder it's going to be for you.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And anytime
the product side.
Yeah.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Yeah, no, but that makes perfect sense. Just creating your own category, you have to take all that into account, and getting that awareness out, is extremely important. But also understanding like all the different stakeholders and why they're doing X, Y, and Z takes a lot of listening and due diligence to understand that a lot of those boxes are checked, so that when you are creating your own category, it does provide those benefits still.
Absolutely.
Nice. And what I wanted to do was switch gears a little bit, and I wanted to ask you for what I call a CEO hack. And this might be an app, a book, or a habit that you have, but it's something that makes you more effective and efficient.
Well, so yeah, I mean, I think for me, the word that the thing I was thinking about is transparency. And I think that what I've learned about myself, now I'm 8 years into my entrepreneurial career, starting and running startups, is I think I was early on, I always prided myself on my transparency about the business and really communicating effectively to stakeholders, whether it's employees or customers or investors, on what was happening with the company. I didn't necessarily translate that into my personal life so much. So, but then I have 2 young kids now. I have a 4 and a 2-year-old. They take up a ton of time and energy. And that's time and energy that, frankly, I used to devote to my startups. And so now I'm like a 9 to 5 and then, 8 to 10 or 11, but I'm like a 9 to 5 employee more often during the work week. And what I've learned about myself and then what I've been able to sort of bring to the organization is being transparent about where I'm at personally with the team and having sort of the confidence in myself and in my team to be able to share what's happening to me. I think at first I tried to hide why I wasn't necessarily in the office as long or why I duck out early for, something at a kid's school, because I felt like almost it was a negative that was taking me away from the business. Now I found that actually being more transparent about not just what's happening with the company, what's happening with me, and why I have to be more focused when I am at my desk or in the office. It's actually driven that out to the team, both employees and colleagues, partners. I mean, everybody sort of understands why I'm trying to keep us very focused, because time is just short for me during the day, and then it results in them being more focused. And so I think that transparency takes, whether it's courage or just or whatever it is, I don't want to overstate it, but I think that transparency actually is something that has helped me as CEO and help the team, because it allows us to be more focused in a way that people are sort of aligned to, as opposed to wondering. And so that's something that's really served me well, and I think ultimately creates a stronger relationship with your entire team.
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense, because I think sometimes when we look at, businesses and organizations, we forget that it's made up of people, and people have kids, they have wives, they have, sons and daughters, dogs, all these things that, people have. So a lot of times, by, showing and being transparent, as you said, you can a lot of times have a type of connection, because they're like, oh, I have to run to my son's soccer game or something like that too. So they kind of understand. It kind of creates a better engagement. Is that kind of like what you're speaking to?
It does. And I also think that, you get to it faster, so often, people, lots of people are familiar with standing meetings or all these different tools or tricks that people try and use to keep groups working towards core problems or the core deliverables more efficiently. And I think this is that sort of personal transparency, I think, about, for me and where my life is at and why I need to be unavailable at certain times, whereas I may have previously been in the office at those hours. It drives the rest of the team to be similarly focused when we are all together, and we don't dilly dally. We get to it, and everyone understands we've got to cut to the core quickly and come up with solutions, because we don't have time to sit for 3 hours in the conference room and debate. We got to bring it to the table. So that kind of efficiency has come from, I think, the transparency. People. Whereas in the past, maybe I would have tried to use, it might have come across as obnoxious, if I were to say, guys, we got to move through this faster. People may have felt like I was disrespecting them or a process. Now they understand why I'm pushing the team to move faster, and they're more on board with, kind of the dynamic, and it comes from a place of honesty, so they embrace it more.
Yeah, it sounds like everybody's bought in because they're on the same page, because they understand exactly why. And once you understand that why, then it becomes easier to execute on that and be as efficient as you said. So I appreciate you for being transparent about that. And now I wanted to ask you for what I call a CEO Nugget. And this is a word of wisdom or piece of advice. Or if you can hop into a time machine, what would you tell your younger business self?
Yeah, I think I actually talk about this a lot now. So it's something, I think the thing I could not understand as a young entrepreneur, or a first-time entrepreneur, I should say, is just how fundamental those first choices you make are on the kind of business you have as it grows. And, when you're in that early exciting days, you have an idea, you just want to go at it. You tend to kind of just glob onto whatever can help you, whether it's, a mentor, an employee, a funder, like whatever the thing is that's going to get you going. Like you tend to just want to, great, like let's get going. The problem with that is that once you're a year, 2, 3, 4 in, those earliest choices really impact what that company looks and feels like to you then. And, entrepreneurs are always understaffed, under-resourced. Like, you have to make choices. But, a classic example, I think, is with, it's more popular these days to raise money with convertible debt because you're like delaying decisions that around equity and valuations and things like that. As an entrepreneur, if that's the type of company you're trying to create and you're raising money that way, you think, oh, that's great. Except for now you've started this clock that is like an up and out mentality that's the only way you're going to succeed is if in a year or two you've grown enough to go and raise money again. Right. And that is putting you on a path that is almost impossible to get off of. And you may not even understand that at day one. Yeah. And so you might be a year or two in and feeling like things are going great, except they're not going so great that you can raise more money. And now your companies might be done, even though you've created so much traction. So those early decisions make huge impacts on later decisions. And you have to, I think, therefore, have a very honest conversation with yourself when you're starting a new venture of what does success look and feel like to me? And what are the choices I'm making today that may make that more difficult or more successful? And at least now you sort of have some visibility to it because things happen faster and harder than you ever imagined. And so if you don't make the right choices first, you're going to have way harder choices later.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the fact that, kind of that North Star is like, what is success for you as well, too, because then once you have, I guess the full menu of the options and understand the pros and cons of each to some degree, I guess, you understand that, okay, I want to make this decision. This is the pros and cons of it. This is what could happen if, it doesn't go according to plan, but at least you make that decision in alignment with that North Star.
Yeah, I mean, some people there's nothing wrong with building a lifestyle business, which allows you to work for yourself and make, hopefully a good living and, run that company for years or decades. There's nothing wrong with that. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to have grand ambitions to grow $1 billion company either. But the way you start your business can really preclude you from having those different outlets way faster than you imagine. And so it's important to understand what success is for you when you're starting.
That makes perfect sense. And now I wanted to ask you my absolute favorite question, which is kind of in alignment with what we just talked about, which is the definition of what it means to be a CEO. And we're hoping to have different quote unquote CEOs on the show. As you mentioned, lifestyle entrepreneurs are the $1 billion, entrepreneurs that are looking to build that. But I wanted to ask you specifically, Michael, what does being a CEO mean to you?
Well, I think that I think about being a CEO as how you is somebody who has to handle problems head on when things go wrong, and then facilitates a vision and accountability to make sure things go right. So you're accountable on both ends. Things are going to go wrong, things are going to go right. And to me, a CEO is somebody who creates that space, that vision and accountability with an organization so that the organization is moving towards success, but then also has the fortitude to stand up front and address any problems when things go wrong.
Absolutely. I think that makes perfect sense. And it's a great reminder, kind of the buck stops with you as a CEO one way or another. So it's a great thing to kind of remember. So I truly appreciate your time again. What I wanted to do is pass you the mic, so to speak, Michael, and let us know if there's anything additional you want to let our readers and listeners know. And then, of course, how best people can get a hold of you.
Well, I think the only other thing I would say is sort of dovetailing a little bit off of what we were talking about earlier is that when as a relatively experienced founder and CEO at this point, what I'm constantly reminded of is how hard it is to get off the train. And once you start down this path as an entrepreneur, as a CEO, you think, it's easy to tell yourself, I'm just going to do it for a little while and see how it goes. It almost never happens that way. You get invested financially, emotionally, your relationships with your funders, with your partners. It is an amazing world to work in, and you gain amazing skills. it's really hard to get off the train. So coming back to that self-reflection and honesty, you better really want to do it, because in a year or two, if it's not going that great and you think you'll just decamp for another job, it often doesn't work that way. You fight for it, so if you don't think you have that fight, it might not be the right path for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, so thank you for the opportunity, guys. I always love to hear from others. The easiest way to get me is just in my Returnity email, which is mike@returnity.co.
Awesome. And we'll have the link for that in the website as well in the show notes. But Mike, I appreciate your time again. I hope you have a phenomenal rest of the day.
Thank you so much.